Hey y'all, it's Blake. I'm the Highlander hipster. Hope you are doing well. Today I have something that I've been working on for some time that I hope you appreciate. Welcome to the Commandies, an award show inspired by limited resources and Michael Scott, and definitely not an elaborate D's nuts joke, as tempting as that is. The presentation today is made to look back at 2024 to highlight the best and worst cards, decks, and gameplay aspects for the Commander format. After I hand out the awards, stick around to check out the ranties at the end, where I babble on about how special other cards are that didn't quite make the cut for an award, but still are worthy of attention and praise. So without further ado, let's get into the most self-indulgent category out of the way, which is my favorite Commander of the year. Our candidates for the award are Vanifar Evolved Enigma, Wily Duke Atten Hero, Tamio Inquisitive Student, Zoraline Cosmos Caller, and Neardiv Devious Diver. Our winner, Wily Duke, was definitely the standout for the year. A really cool card draw engine that requires a bit of work with a lot of build around options. Payoffs for My Guys Want to Be Tap decks were pretty slim on release, but by the end of the year, the survival mechanic would appear and give a much needed push to the archetype to get it much more to work with. I have constructed my version of the deck to be focused on winning with Halo Fountain, since many of the build arounds make tokens and Halo Fountain itself can act as a payoff, even when it's not winning the game. I quite enjoy the other contestants as well. Vanifar is a cool Simic cheat my stuff into play deck that uses flicker spells to cheat not just big creatures, but all sorts of various non-creature permanents into play, which have no business being on the battlefield. Tamio is a hand-sized matters deck focused on draw a card synergies. This is the only deck that I have since taken apart. Zoraline was a small reanimator deck for not just creatures, but could still cheat in big creatures by bringing back Animate Dead or a similar permanent with Zoraline's trick. Neardiv is the newest addition, being a very strange mix of flashback and Voltron stuff, since many of the cheap flashback spells give evasion, and Neardiv can get quite large inherently if you're doing the thing. The deck runs all sorts of terrible cards, which I'm always down for. The deck definitely is more fragile than I would like, however, as it's very reliant on its commander. As you can probably tell, I like weird decks and like building things in unique ways, so if any of these deck ideas sound interesting to you, let me know down below. Next up, Best New Mechanic of the Year. Our contestants are Spree, Free Running, Gift, Offspring, and Rooms. And our winner, Spree. Free Running and Gift I don't find very interesting or impactful for the future, so they really weren't in contention here. Offspring and Rooms have really cool potential for the future in inverse. They are both optional 2-for-1s. Offspring gives you tons of board presence. It also gives you opportunities to make weird tokens for things like Populate. Rooms are just a ton of value despite being one of the clunkiest mechanics implemented in the entire game. I get why they did it, because they're scared of people cheating them into play or whatever, but it's just a needless mess. Spree is our winner here, even though its current selection of cards are just okay to good. Modal cards are always powerful, which essentially every mechanic on this list is, even when overcosted, and they often are. But Spree is well designed where many others aren't. It gives the full range of levers to pull for play design and balance purposes. However, the name is very poor and doesn't make much thematic sense. I think this will be the biggest limiting factor in terms of what sets it can show up in the future. What a strange way to shoot yourself in the foot. Pun intended. Now something for the non-brewers of the community. We're going to move on to the best precons of the year. Our contestants, Family Manners with Zinnia, Quick Draw with Stella Lee, Tricky Terrain with Omo, Jump Scare with Zamone, and Death Toll with Winter. And our winner, Quick Draw with Stella Lee. This is a great selection of effective decks out of the box, with powerful commanders to help guide a newer player into learning the value engine of their deck. Zinnia takes over the game if she stays on board, but her deck is a bit of a mess. Omo is a pretty unique and completely different sort of take on a lands deck that gives ridiculous amounts of mana far too early, but is very reliant on Omo staying around, and the deck is a bit on the complicated side for a precon as well. Not to mention the deck clearly has its fair share of filler. Zamone is another bonkers commander with great payoffs, but the deck lacks punching power without her. Winter offers a good base for a self-mill strategy, but could use a little love in terms of optimization. Very functional out of the box, though. All that being said, Quick Draw is a fully set up spell-slinging monster of a deck. It's all killer, no filler, cantrips galore, high-quality mana base for a precon, and all this under a completely nuts Stella Lee. Really surprised they printed this card as they did in today's era of restrictions on activated and triggered abilities. You can add up any number of one card combos to her deck if you want to make it stronger, which you certainly don't need to, or just replace some of the payoffs to something you would prefer. On the end of the spectrum, we have something different. We have the worst precons of the year. And we have a few to choose from. Deadly Disguise with Koust, Most Wanted with Olivia, Graveyard Overdrive with Disa, Science with Dr. Madison Lee, and Peace Offering with Miss Bumbleflower. Our winner is Science, Dr. Madison Lee. Really, any of these options I would respect as a choice outside of Miss Bumbleflower. Peace Offering at least does the group hug archetype well, even though it's isn't the most effective strategy if your goal is to win. How many of you even remembered that the Koust deck existed? While Koust is completely absurd for the strategy, the deck is filled to the brim with just junky cards that Koust wants for synergy. It's a deck that's far too bogged down to be effective. Most Wanted is just a mess. There are so many extreme levels of filler in there. The deck are all over the place in terms of synergy outside of, I guess it's an outlaw. The payoffs for playing outlaws as an archetype are far too thin. A very inconsistent deck that rarely can get its pieces in order without a bit of help. Graveyard Overdrive is also a quite unfocused deck. My biggest qualm with the deck is it doesn't even live up to its promise of the face commander. The deck has an unreasonable number of Goyfs in it. It just has a few. Granted, they're new Goyfs and they're completely nuts, but in general the card quality is high and it's far too unfocused if your goal is to run Disa. Honestly, I would recommend just playing Quorum out of the box. It's a very cool deck, an ode to Jun, but still needs a little help. Our disgraceful winner, Science, just sucks. It's just far worse cousin, the other Jeskai energy deck released this year, and even that deck almost made the list. Science suffers from the normal pitfalls of a universes beyond precon, where it's filled to the brim with, well, filler. All the good lands we got from the even worse Doctor Who decks of last year are gone. The mana base is just barely passable. Your only hope with this deck is to run the backup commander Liberty Prime and try to beat the tar out of your opponents with it. Your energy generation sucks, payoffs suck, so at least Liberty Prime can fill in the gaps for both and maybe get you there? Some other cards that won't get you as far as you think are our next contestants, which is the most hyped card of the year. And our contestants are the Meat Hook Massacre 2, Dawn's Truce, Yigra, Ulamog the Defiler, and 3 Tree City. One of these things is not like the other, and it's the answer, 3 Tree City. Some of you are not going to like that, I'm sure. We had some really great candidates here, though. The Meat Hook Massacre 2 was touted as a worthy callback to its original as an insano value engine, when in reality it's just about as good as its corny-ass name. Dawn's Truce was supposed to be the next coming of Teferi's protection, but it's just one of the many situational protect my board spells we have now. Yigra and Ulamog were going to kill magic apparently during the preview season and afterwards too. All of these were pretty overrated cards. Not that you can't play them, but they're a far cry from what people thought they would be. 3 Tree City for me was always going to be the winner here. The endless comparisons to Nykthos and Gaia's Cradle are sickening. This card, even in the very few decks it has, and it certainly can perform in very specific builds, can't provide a fraction of the mana of what the comparable lands it aspires to be. This point is going to be a little bit of time to fully articulate, but let's look at the top 10 creature type decks people build according to EDHREC and see if we have any homes for this card in the decks if it's asking to be put in them. We got dragons, elves, zombies, vampires, dinosaurs, humans, goblins, Eldrazzis, angels, and slivers. Let's start with dragons. Absolutely fucking not. Dragons are high CMC and are almost always 5 color with a handful being 3 and under. Unless your mana base is completely perfect, fetches, real duels, etc., you can't afford to play colorless utility lands. Your mana base needs to cast your spells, not net you 1 mana when you have 4 dragons in play. If you have 4 dragons in play, I'd find it hard to imagine you aren't completely dominating the game. And you know how you get 4 dragons in play? By not playing this card and instead casting your spells. On the other side of the coin, elves are the home for 3 Tree City and where it can shine. Elves go very wide naturally, help you produce colored mana so it can help you cast your spells while you're waiting for 3 Tree City to come online. And elves are typically built around where their payoffs are extremely high mana dump cards. All the weakness of 3 Tree City gets shored up here, and credit where credit is due. Zombies go back in the dumpster for 3 Tree City. Zombies are extremely strongly black and sometimes blue. They are extremely demanding on their colored pips, even when playing monocolor. While zombies can build up a wide board state, it's just not worth the risk when you have much more powerful options such as Cabal Coffers and Nykthos. You really can't afford to run more of these if you want to cast your spells. Far too awkward on your mana base. Vampires are another multicolor creature type, typically in Mardu, and don't go nearly wide enough to justify not being able to cast your spells. Even Edgar Markov would rather not, since it needs all the colored mana it can get to reliably curve out its board state to be a contender in a game. And when it's not doing that, it has no board state, so City doesn't even help make you mana then. I'm essentially just going to echo this sentiment with any 3+ colored types from here on out. Dinosaurs are high CMC and typically Naya, a very poor home for the same reasons as before. Humans are usually 3+ multicolor, so they have all the same pitfalls, and doubly so since they are pip demanding for their spells. They can go wide, certainly still not a good home though. Goblins do have some potential if you can stick to mono red. Mono red really relies on its utility lands to fix its weakness with things like card draw and board interaction. That's much more preferred than just ramp from 3 Tree City. Red is very capable of that. Goblins are fairly demanding in their colored pips as well, but I think I can see a future if red keeps getting better card draw where Krenko decks could feel good about playing the city. Goblins is one of those decks where the synergy is so strong, once you get enough goblins to start producing real mana with 3 Tree City, your opponent should be dying, so it's like a no trend towards maybe. Eldrazi in the traditional sense, that being colorless, can sort of free roll it since it's just a waste essentially. Will it ever make mana in those decks? Maybe once every 6 games you draw it if it happens to be a particular build, and it's a Thursday with a full moon. Joking aside, Eldrazi is usually 5 color colorless, and you should absolutely not play it in there. See above for the multicolor reasoning. Angels are far too much mana to amass enough where City matters. Same reasoning as dragons and dinos minus the multicolor aspect. Angels are like moderately pip dependent, but the real killer is opportunity cost. We're in the utility land golden age. There's just no reason to play lands that are awkward most of the game and once in a blue moon make you an extra mana. Utility lands are good now. Many of them are just make colored mana as well. So I wouldn't bother spending your money and resources and something that has much greater impact on your deck. Slivers, all the same reasons as dragons, literally the same. If you are a 3 Tree City truther, this is me reaching out to trying to save you. And trust me, I know there's many of you. The data shows it, the community sentiment shows it. That's why this was always going to be the most overhyped card. On the very first sighting of this card, I knew it would cause players to fawn with uncritical eyes. If you come to the conclusion that this card is good, look at it within the context you wish to apply it in. Maybe it's that card has a home, but just not there. If you're wondering, Blake, why are you going so hard on this card? I think it's representative of a much bigger issue in the Commander community. Let me explain. People really like to give their recommendation of cards based on their takes or assumptions without testing them. And I get why. People want to be involved in the discourse of the hobby, and they're excited about something they think is sweet. People have real things going on in their lives and can't go play all the time, so they lean on online discourse to help quench their thirst for engagement in the hobby. Especially in a format based around casual experience, all of that is understandable. But these recommendations come with real costs to the people that they recommend these cards to. Players that are looking for recommendations have the intent to improve their deck. When they are in good faith hoping to find the next thing for their deck to help propel them to having a better deck that impresses their friends, and they instead receive an uncritically formed opinion to purchase an expensive card, or God forbid start opening packs trying to get it, it's going to leave quite the sour taste in their mouth when it fails to perform repeatedly. I've seen this firsthand and the damage it causes many times. To me, sustainability is the key. I want to grow lifers in Magic the Gathering, people that stick around through the thick and thin and really care about the game. If we burn them over and over, especially early on, why would they stay around? We're a community, not the manufacturer of the game. We're supposed to look out for one another, not just ask people to spend more money. A card isn't going to change the game for a player. Growing in this game, so you better understand it, will. If you want to grow as a Commander player, deck builder or lover of the game, I would suggest you reevaluate what you want to achieve with your builds, the cards you put in your decks, and the finances you dedicate to this game. If you need help, you're not alone, and I challenge you to ask for help. Speaking from experience, nearly everybody does. I'm always a student of the game and seeking ways I can reflect and improve. Hell, I've had to reflect on my relationship with the game several times as of late. My recommendation isn't 3 Tree City, the next hyped card, or any card. It's to get involved in your local community. That's the only way I got where I am. Magic is about the gathering. I guess I gave you a bonus ranty in the middle, huh? Hopefully I articulated my point in an understandable way. Didn't know I signed you up for all that, so let's just get back on track. Sticking with the land theme, we're going to move to the best cycle, not lands, and then we'll move into the best cycle lands. So our best cycle, not lands category has the Seasons from Bloomburrow, the Enduring Cycle from Duskmourn, the Flip Planeswalker Creatures from Modern Horizon 3, Impending Creatures, the Overlords from Duskmourn, and Flares from Modern Horizons 3. And the winner, the Enduring Enchantment Creatures from Duskmourn. This was a really close race. I have to give it to the Enduring Cycle. The effects of every single one of these is extremely appealing and widely desired in their respective colors. Most of them would be considered pretty large upgrades from their peers, particularly because they're stapled onto creatures which naturally just have much more utility than enchantments. Not to mention some of them have free keywords slapped on, while being just as sticky as enchantments because they have a second life. Speaking of their peers, all of these effects are extremely desired for density as well. The effects that they have are hard to come by. Cryptolith Rite, Welcoming Vampire, Coastal Piracy, Sanguine Bond, Ogre Battle Driver. Yep, all extremely desired effects without any parallels. Lots of great contestants here, but it's got to be this cycle for me. Next up, we're going to move into the best land cycle of the year. First up, we have Surveil lands, the Verge lands, and the monocolored buddy lands is what I'm calling them. These are like Shifting Woodland, Arena of Glory, Archway of Innovation, etc. Our winner, Surveil lands. While we didn't have new land cycles, not very many at least, this year, these are extremely impressive and all worth talking about. Firstly, Surveil lands are the best always tapped fixing lands we've ever had. Yes, even better than Triomes. You want a balance depending on the number of colors in your deck between Triomes and 2-color tapped lands, but definitely the Surveil lands will overperform over Triomes. Fixing lands, fixing your draws while being fetchable is far more powerful than it may seem, all the while giving you small graveyard synergies. They deserve to find their way into every 2-color deck of their pair, with some number of them being into 3-color and up decks. Really the only downside is the cat's out of the bag on these, so the cost I'm sure will be the major prohibiting factor for most people in terms of these actually making their way into people's decks. Make no mistake, if you have these and are considering if they're good enough to make it in your decks, the answer is yes, regardless of budget. I have a 4-color deck that I would consider, for all intents and purposes, a perfect mana base, and I play these in that deck too. Now, Verge lands, very formidable, untapped dual lands, some of the best we've had in a long time, in fact. In the early turns where your mana may have not fully flourished because of an awkward keep, these still produce 1 color. As soon as you draw either color of its buddies, the land immediately unlocks. Almost all other untapped duels have a much higher bars to clear, while these don't have any to enter untapped, and still produce colored mana immediately. Extremely impressive. The only downside is that they are only available in ally colors right now. I really hope this cycle gets finished up ASAP. Seems likely as they don't tend to leave unfinished land cycles nowadays because of player sentiment. Hopefully Aether Drift they get printed. Lastly, the MH3 buddy lands. The range from ridiculously powerful to just okay. So as a full cycle, it doesn't feel complete as the other two. Their cost of inclusion is extremely low in 1 and 2 color decks nonetheless. That doesn't mean some of the members aren't in the running for some of the best cards of the whole year. Arena of Glory and Shifting Woodlands certainly being the best of the cycle. Spymaster's Vault, though, shouldn't be slept on, so keep that one in mind. Archway and Henge are nice and still have some homes. A great year for lands. Speaking of, our next category, Best Utility Land of the Year. And our contestants are Talon Gates of Madara, Urza's Cave, Shifting Woodland, Arena of Glory, Lazotep Quarry, and Horizon of Progress. See, I didn't make you wait very long to see how I felt about these cards. And our winner, Shifting Woodland. Now it's time for some yapping. This is my specialty, and if you're asking, do you mean yapping or utility lands? The answer is yes. Also, look at the runtime on this video. Now look at the list of these cards. I can't believe these cards are even real, let alone came out all in the same year. I could write hundreds, thousands, endless amounts of words on the power of utility lands. To think a year ago I was considering War Room a peak utility land that was really exciting due to its efficiency and reliability when you really need something to do. Alright, I have to start talking about our Winter Shifting Woodlands. How is this card real? This is an untapped green source that allows me to reanimate anything in my graveyard at instant speed every single turn. On my turn, I can make it the most powerful engine piece my opponents got rid of earlier that will often win me the game on the spot. On my opponent's turn, I can make it an unbeatable creature that they can never attack through, which I won't even have to spend the mana to do because of threat of activation, or use it as an interaction piece if they try to do something degenerate. My cost for doing all that? The normal cost of a reanimate spell and a graveyard that has cards in it. You know, the thing that happens when you play Magic the Gathering. I ask once again, how is this card real? This is a land. Lands are not supposed to do this. And I don't know if you've heard, but green is pretty good at getting lands. Once this land is in play, everything that happens for the rest of the game is so scary for your opponents. The ceiling for this card is just limitless, while the floor couldn't be any higher. I'll stop myself here by at least saying that this is also one of the most skill testing cards around, but that's its only achieved maximum value. You listening to this can still test out and realize how powerful this card is without being a genius. That's how great it is. At some point, your force is going to turn into, oh, I have an avenue to win the game. Its younger brother, Arena of Glory, follows in the footsteps, Woodland's Glory, for a lot of the same characteristics. Floor is extremely high, your utility is much more limited while being extremely powerful and straightforward. Giving your creatures on demand haste with a land that doesn't even put you down mana the turn is unprecedented as well. Not a lot of trickery here, just really strong. There is one little trick that you can do. If you spend one of each of the 2 mana it makes with its ability on 2 different creatures, they both enter with haste. Arena is a strong blunt force object that will certainly pull its weight. Talon Gates of Madara is an uncounterable in the traditional sense, removal or protection effect that can simultaneously ramp you when you put it into play with its own ability. A very strange card, but nonetheless extremely powerful, especially for decks that can afford to be colorless utility land heavy, such as lands decks or monocolor decks. Talon Gates' biggest limiting factor will be its availability to players. If you can get your hands on one, it will certainly be a valuable piece of your deck building arsenal. Next up, we'll talk about Urza's Cave. Urza's Cave is another great example of how is this card real. We just have lands now that can just tutor up any other land from your deck, and it also puts it into play. Normally, when Wizards does an effect for the first time, they start high on the cost of the utility and slowly work their way down, such as like Arch of Erasca slowly working its mana cost down to War Room. They did not do that with Urza's Cave. They went straight to the cost it should be. Well, probably a little low of what it should be. Where I would never in my wildest dreams imagine a card like Shifting Woodland as a possibility to be printed, Urza's Cave is a card I hypothesized would be printed at some point. I would have never have guessed it would have gotten printed in this state on first iteration, but here we are. You can go get your Valakuts, Glacial Chasms, Shifting Woodlands, Field of the Deads, Cabal Coffers, Talon Gates of Madara, whatever you can imagine. Insanely appealing to do in many decks, and it enters untapped. Just unreal. So next up, we'll talk about Lazotep Quarry, also known as I'm not in green, so I can't play Shifting Woodland. Obviously, I'm being a bit facetious here. By its own merits, a very impressive card, potentially multi-use reanimate stapled to a land. More importantly, it's a very needed increase to the number of sacrifice outlets stapled to lands. Phyrexian Tower is obviously the king that hopefully never gets supplanted, but your next in line is High Market. Obviously, you reluctantly play it and probably still will, but Quarry is much closer to Tower than it is Market. And it's very exciting, especially with the extra utility that it offers. And hey, special shout out to Populate decks, give you more weird ways to make powerful token versions of cards that you aren't supposed to. I would love to give Horizon of Progress more time, but this section is already long enough. I truly love this land, and to think it's certainly being slept on, even though I'm still pretty big mad they haven't finished the Horizon Canopy cycle, this acts as a catch-all to the color combos they haven't made yet. Even down to being to monocolor decks, which I'm actually running it in a monocolor deck personally. Getting utility on your fixing lands is a mold breaker for the purposes of balancing. Being able to cycle your fixing land away for a really cheap cost when you really need something to do is far more than you could ask for. Meanwhile, in the mid game, the Horizon offers extra ramp if you need help accelerating, while offering even better fixing than its Horizon cousins. A stellar card that couples high levels of fixing with high levels of utility. So, I love it. It's an awesome card. Now is the time where you and I both contemplated why you clicked on this video, and we are both perpetually filled with disappointment. Speaking of which, we'll move on to our next category, most disappointing set of the year. And we got some strong contestants here. So let's talk about Fallout, Murders at Karlov Manor, Outlaws of Thunder Junction, and Bloomborough. One of these things is not like the other. And you guessed it. Once again, the thing that's not like the other is the winner, Bloomborough. What's funny about this is the more that you know me, the less likely you are to get this right. The kind of kicker here is Bloomborough was a set I actually had expectations for, which is why I have disappointment for it, unlike all the other sets on this list. One of the few sets, actually. While I much more am interested in gameplay aspects of card designs and less on the aesthetics of cute animals to draw me in, I did feel like Wizards would take the easy slam dunk with a 1-2 punch of wide aesthetic appeal with powerful and widely effective cards. They didn't hit the latter point at all, though. The cards in Bloomborough are very much in their own linear lanes, attempting to appeal to the audience of whatever new creature type the end user is drawn to. It's a trend of the past few years that I find very boring as an advanced deck builder. It leads to not many cards actually making it into a deck building arsenal. I'll give a little credit where credit is due. Bloomborough did have a standout selection of classes. I've been really clamoring for all the class cards I can get since Adventures in the Forgotten Realms. Their design is just so clever and appealing on so many levels. They really feel like fixed sagas. The timing and effects of them feel much more flexible, accessible, and powerful. Please keep making classes. What some of you thought this category might have been, we're going to move on to the worst set of the year. And our contestants here are going to be a lot of familiar faces. Assassin's Creed, Murders at Karlov Manor, Outlaws of Thunder Junction, and Fallout again. And our winner, Assassin's Creed. A truly pathetic selection this year. Really, you could make a pretty strong argument for any of these, as sad as it is. I drew the line at Assassin's Creed. The design is so phoned in and pathetic. The most appealing aspect of this set is that they reprinted Sword of Feast and Famine. All the new cards in this set care about assassins. Does your deck care about assassins? Very unlikely. Oh well, guess you're skipping 90% of the cards from this set. Even the free running mechanic has a lazy tacked on if you hit somebody with an assassin or commander, as if they knew these cards wouldn't matter, but they had to find some way to get you to look at cards from this set. What does free running have to do with commanders? Now that there's cards that say commander on them that are legal and modern, as much as I would like to break down on how terrible this set is, I think we all know it. So I won't waste any more time on this new player acquisition tool, if that's the narrative people are still trying to spin on with this garbage fire. On the opposite end of the spectrum, we have the next category, which is the best set of the year. And we have a few contestants, not nearly as many as the bad. Our contestants are Duskmourn, MH3, and Foundations. Our winner, MH3. Man, where to even begin with this set? This set is the most impactful set to my Commander collection ever. Period. Full stop. I've been playing EDH since before the codifying of Commander. My collection of Commander decks, I try to keep it at about a cap of 40, and every single deck in my collection was changed. All of them. At the most basic level, the MDFC lands went into all of them. The power of the utility that they offer is unmatched for their cost of inclusion. The cycle, they decided to make their cost of inclusion to be as close to nothing as possible, with all the monocolor ones having the option to enter untapped, and they even made two-color versions as well that produce both colors on the back, similar to a Guildgate style of fixing land. Not only that, but the front sides of these cycles have never been more playable cards, ranging from real interaction spells to staple-style value creatures with fair costs. That's just the tip of the MH3 iceberg. I could talk for days about all the powerful and interesting designs that widely appeal to many decks, archetypes, in effective ways, all of which while being within the realm of manageability. For Commander, MH3 is truly at the pinnacle of what sets should be. That being said, it certainly shouldn't be the standard. It's the set that finds the limit of what is acceptable. Now we should take a few steps back and use what we've learned for sustainability purposes. Of course, not every card in the set didn't walk off that ledge. Nadu, a card that casts a very small shadow on the commander format that needs no introduction. Nadu was a grossly overpowered card only due to its lack of testing because of a head designer wanted to rush and not follow due process, which for all intents and purposes was changed from an extremely reasonable card, a card that just gave your things flash and drew you cards when your opponents targeted your things, to being the completely dominant powerhouse atrocity that is getting banned everywhere today. Cards getting banned is never a good sign, but people were quick to move on from it without much remorse, so I'll do the same. Now for our final and most important award, Card of the Year. And we have quite a selection, but I limited it down to 7, and let's get into who they are. The aforementioned Shifting Woodland, Enduring Vitality to represent the best of the Enduring Cycle, Flare Fortitude to represent the best of the Flare Cycle, Lumra, Bellow of the Woods, an Aftermath Analyst, very similar cards, Chthonian Nightmare, and Sink into Stupor. And our winner, Shifting Woodland. It just had to be Shifting Woodlands. As a singular standout card, it felt like it just had to be. It represents the year for Commander in every way. Lands being the all-stars, graveyards never mattering more, utility, 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 and modality. All on a super free roll package that sounds like all the things cards aspire to be in 2024. Certainly say more about Shifting Woodland. Instead, I'll let all my previous words stand for this card and move on to the Ranty's selection of the award show, where I take the opportunity to give the cards that didn't get an award their flowers. We had a pretty special year this year, and there's so many cards I want to talk about, so I'll highlight a not so few number of them on our way out. Let's start with some of our runners-up. Enduring Vitality acts as a much more tutorable and synergistic card type in its color compared to its very powerful brother, Cryptolith, right? That's not the only reason it makes up for its extra mana cost. It also taps for mana itself and gets a second life, a card that has homes all over the place with an effect that's hard to come by. Flare Fortitude is certainly the standout of the cycle. We're definitely reaching the point of which of these protect my board spells should I play in white. Flare Fortitude does the best impersonation of Teferi's protection of the bunch, which is the marker they all aspire to be. At the low cost of losing your worst non-token creature, which white has plenty of since it's a very board-based color, and you get to protect all of your stuff and yourself, it being your life total, many of the other board protection spells miss the last crucial bit that Teferi's protection gives you. The other flares that are all pretty impressive, except for Cultivate, but they are much more in the realm of balanced and reasonable compared to this one. Next runner-up, we'll talk about Lumra and Aftermath Analysts sort of together. Finally, we're getting to a critical mass of Bring All My Lands Back cards that we've been needing. Splendid Reclamation has felt quite bad for some time. It's a card type that just doesn't synergize very well with graveyard and landfall decks it tries to find a home in, while the creature typing is exactly what those decks have been seeking. These two both spot you a little bit of mill to boot. Aftermath Analyst lets you pay the cost in installments for when the time is right for you, while Lumra is just an absolute giant idiot that makes a great blocker as well. They give you all the effect and immediacy of Splendid Reclamation, but take out all the downsides of the sorcery card type. Excellent additions to the Year of Utility lands. Next up, we'll talk about Chthonian Nightmare. And man, if you know me, if this wasn't for stupid, sexy Shifting Woodland, this card definitely would have won my favorite card of the year. Chthonian Nightmare is so fun to play. It just keeps looping all your stupid little idiot utility creatures that I love playing. And if you want to work your way up the chain, you can eventually get yourself a big idiot threat. But you don't even need to do that. I'm just here to bring back my Skyclave Apparitions and Lorn of the Third Pass over and over and truly make my opponent's game a nightmare. It may not be recurring nightmare, but for only 2 mana, it offers the utility in spades without the brute force. An amazing and effective callback. Look, I could spend days talking about how good all the new MDFCs are. And I'm sure you've heard by now how Witch Enchanter is a very passable card on its face, where its cost of inclusion is 0, or Bogart Trawler makes it so easy to get more incidental graveyard hate in your deck. Or similarly, Sundering Eruption gives you way more ways to destroy broken utility lands. In the late game, you have an I win Alpha Strike button shutting off your opponent's blocks. Even the not impressive ones make their homes into decks all over the place, since the floor is essentially nothing as long as you have find the tiniest bit of synergy in your deck. But the real winner here is Sink into Stupor. Stupor can take care of threats as they happen, or on the stack, or later on the battlefield. Blue also happens to be the color that synergizes best with its card type, and blue also happens to have like having a critical mass of blue cards to pitch to other spells that massively reduce their cost, aka make them free. Having lands in your deck that can pitch to these effects is pretty unreal if that's the kind of game you're going for. I never thought we would get more untapped in DFC lands, but here we are. Next up, we'll start working on some more rapid fire sections as we kind of go through the sets of the year. We'll highlight some cards from sort of each set. So we'll start at the beginning of the year with Murders at Karlov Manor. We're going to start with Delny Streetwise Lookout. Gives much more support to the white weenies but value decks they've been trying to design and focus on as of late, and I'm here for it. A card to have in your arsenal and to keep your eye on. Archdruid's Charm was not on my bingo card, the next in the cycle to get made, but I'm damn sure glad it was. A Swiss Army knife that offers everything green could want, removal in whatever form you need, while also acting as a tutor ramp spell for whatever best land or creature that you need is at instant speed. Wow, just wow. Mono green players rejoice, and some 2-color decks can play it too. Trouble in Pairs is pretty gross by all accounts. Price is gross, art is gross because it's stolen, amount of card draw is gross. You probably won't see it much for these reasons, but it's undoubtedly one of the best generic card draw engines in the whole format. Pick Your Poison is an innocuous little removal spell that offers tons of utility and effectiveness for the lowest cost possible. Reenact the Crime is one to keep an eye on. It's like a mono blue reanimator spell that can also reanimate your opponent's things if you mill them or mill themselves. It really fucks up a graveyard player who's trying to get a little cute. A card that's hard to find space for, but one to keep your mind on for sure. As much as I wish the Fallout product didn't happen, there are a few good cards from it. Veronica Dissonant Scribe is a really important card to come out in this set, as it offers much needed support for the direction Red had been drifting towards for a while, but lacked the reason to actually do it for payoffs, that being rummaging and looting. Previously, the hope was that you would put in a very inefficient flashback or madness card in your deck to actually gain card advantage from these effects. Veronica offers that with help from Inti from LCI at the end of last year, and some other new cards as well to actually make the strategy more feasible. Pre-war formal wear is truly the standout from Fallout, a small reanimator effect that works well with the small dudes archetype we talked about earlier. Artifact synergistic decks definitely consider it, and it gives equipment decks a much needed utility to get their invaluable engine utility creatures that their deck hinges on back onto the battlefield. A card with many homes that has another effect, not on my bingo card, but boy, I'm happy it's here. Codsworth is another strong option for equipment decks. It offers ways to help you equip your things while also protecting them. Junktown is a great utility land for mono red decks, so keep your eye on this one. Don't forget this one exists. And Mysterious Stranger is just plain fun and effective. Next up, we're going to move on to the big score. While being only a handful of cards, definitely has noteworthies. Really, I would recommend giving them all a look, but I'll mostly highlight a few that I really like. Molten Duplication is a hyper-efficient effect that is sure to get your mana's worth in our ETB Bonanza world. Fomori Vault is an excellent option for artifact-based decks to help you keep your wheels greased. It effectively acts as like a pseudo-tutor once you get kind of to the late game and you have a bajillion artifacts on the battlefield, which all artifact decks do nowadays. Vaultborn Tyrant is a big stupid idiot that likes big stupid idiots, and many people like that. Collector's Cage is an awesome value engine that spews counters all over the place, gets you a free spell, and synergizes with many decks of archetypes that White likes to lean into. Don't sleep on this one. Outlaws didn't give me much to be excited about, but I do like Insatiable Avarice, Bristly Bill, Outcaster Trailblazer, and Make Your Own Luck. Insatiable Avarice is a highly efficient card draw spell for mono black that also offers you to pick out any card from your deck if you have a couple extra mana. Any mono black deck is happy to have it. Bill is still one of the best +1 counter engines we've seen, even offering the threat of activation to continually double the size of whatever growing army. Trailblazer is great for green idiot based decks. It's actually a card worth plotting. Speaking of plotting, Make Your Own Luck is just plain awesome fun. A 5 mana draw 3 that gives you a free spell next turn is just brimming with fun potential. Is it good? No, but god damn it, even gets my Timmy wheels turning. That being said, I only have made it into 1 or 2 decks. What can I say? Bad cards are fun. I would talk for MH3 for far too long, so I'm going to limit myself to 5 cards. I'm going to start with 6. See, 5, 6. Do you like that joke? Gives green decks unparalleled access to nearly their entire graveyard immediately, and it helps feed its own engine once you can attack with it. A really sweet card to keep your eye on. Ripples of Undeath is just stupid, sexy graveyard value. You'd be surprised how few cards just consistently mill you for a reasonable number of cards every turn for a low cost. Ripples even has the buyout clause in case you run into a situation of, oh darn, I accidentally milled my reanimate spell and the big stupid idiot I wanted to target with it. Whatever will I do? Just 1 mana can fix your problems. Generally, I don't even pay for the mana for this ability. I'm just happy with the mill engine. Having the option already right there, though, is just icing on the undead cake. Why did I say that? Anyways, with all the new value gained from all these insane utility lands, I'm going to need more ways to get them. Oh, hi, Sewing Mycospawn. Fancy seeing you here. On rate tutor, any land right into play on a cast trigger stapled to a creature. That also can get rid of my opponent's lands who are trying to be playing good lands like me. I love this little weirdo. It's a pretty sweet little card. Next up, the cutest doggo. Phalia is a really powerful value engine for white decks that can remove blockers or, more importantly, take advantage of your ETB effects, which, let's be honest, every deck does this nowadays. So, really love Phalia. She's a great little utility role player. Alright, let's cap off the MH3 with Grim Servant. Tutors stable to creatures in black heavy decks are very exciting. Who cares about the devotion clause? I'm happy to get busted lands with this thing. Don't forget that the creature type is zombie, if that's your style. Next, we'll move up to Assassin's Creed, as much as I'd rather not. But I did find one card that was worth talking about, and that's Brotherhood Regalia. It's a good Voltron equipment that definitely is worth a look. Yeah, it's really the only card in the set that's worth talking about, but the unblockability in the Ward 2 to be able to slap onto your commander for such a cheap cost is certainly something to keep your eye on. Next up, we'll move into Bloomborough, which had the talents as mentioned earlier. Just to give them, I would just recommend giving them all a look, to be honest. They're great. The one that's certainly the most impactful that I'll highlight here is Caretaker's talent, an incredible draw engine that token decks have desperately needed, and it even spots you a token when you need it. It also offers a powerful anthem when it's time to start turning the corner. Really everything you need in the archetype in one package. Agate Instigator is really helping us get to the critical mass of this pinging effect, and really the best to do it outside of Perforos and Terror of the Peaks. I would still put those above it, but it's still really great company and really powerful. The decks that want these want all of them, so the more the merrier. So Agate Instigator is super welcome. And lastly, for Bloomborough, I'm going to highlight Stargaze. I think it's a card that's being slept on. When you need help hitting your land drops early mid-game, it ensures the selection to get you to your late game and help you hit your land drops. And in the late game, it acts as a super tutor, letting you look at so many cards that you're going to find what you need and have plenty of Cole's cash to pick up whatever else your heart desires on the way out. Not sponsored. Next up, we're going to move to Duskmoor, and then there's a lot to talk about. We're going to start off with Tyvar the Pummeler. It's completely ridiculous as a card. A repeatable, overwhelming stampede that can protect itself on demand is pretty absurd. Double pumping your board with it is just bound to annihilate whoever you see fit if you have any sort of reasonable board state. Green is the perfect color to go find this creature when you need it. Unlike other overruns stable to creatures such as Craterhoof, it's really easy just to throw out Tyvar whenever it's convenient without having to dedicate all your resources right now for your Alpha Strike. You'll want to give this one a try. I don't think people are talking about this card very much. Screaming Nemesis is just a brute-ass dude. If you're into stuffy doll effects, this is certainly the best one. This card design is just terrible, though. Taking out counterplay from cards is just not interesting and makes the game worse. Even once in a while, I guess play design forgets some of the core tenets of what makes the game great, and we get left with crap like this. I could go on, but you get the idea of my disdain for this card. Next up, Fear of Missing Out. Another great payoff for the red I want to discard my things deck. It spots you the one when it enters, and it helps you push damage. Keep in mind, if you play this as the last card in your hand, you don't have to discard a card if you don't have any, and you still get to draw the card. Very rare wording by today's standards. Next up, Abhorrent Oculus is just as good, if not better, in Commander compared to all the waves it's making in constructed formats. The spaghetti monster only needs the smallest amount of help with putting cards in your graveyard, and you'll nearly be playing this thing on curve. It's ridiculously cheap mana wise for the army in a can for a color that doesn't really get access to an effect like that. The only problem with this card is it isn't cheap monetarily. Here's hoping you open one in a pack so you can actually try this sicko card. Metamorphosis Fanatic is a really great reanimate target that can also oops into I just did a disgusting thing. A great card for top deck manipulation decks and effects, or just pair it with a vampiric tutor. This card is just the right amount of finesse and power, and I love it. The final shout out in Duskmourn goes to Withering Torment. I never felt good about playing Feed the Swarm, so much so that I didn't find it worth playing. Sorcery speed, I take a million damage, no synergy with other cards on my deck. I'd rather just cut my losses and play like an All Is Dust or something if I'm really worried about enchantments. Now, Withering Torment at least has the decency and respect to let me have the same effect at instant speed and at a fraction of the life loss, so I can keep some of my life to draw cards with. All that being said, please stop playing both of these if you have access to green and or white. You have a million better options, so just please don't. It hurts my deck building heart. If you're in like Rakdos or Dimir or Grixis, you can consider Withering Torment. My god, he's finally almost done yapping endlessly. Why are you still even here? But I guess while I have you, let's just wrap this up with Foundations. We'll move on to Blasphemous Edict. It was worth the hype, for sure. It's a very, very good 5-mana board wipe that gets around similar effects such as Toxic Deluge, but sometimes you just can hard cast it for 1 mana, and it's completely absurd. Will that be an infrequent casting it for 1 mana? Yeah, but it will be frequent enough where it's worth it. Next up, we have Loot. Loot is once again helping with our critical massive effects that allow us to play additional lands, and gives you a solid outlet to dump that mana if you need things to do. Kaikar is another slept on super murmuring mystic that can also flicker your things for value. I would much more focus on this card as a payoff for your Spellslinger decks and less for your Flicker decks. Spellslinger decks are much more need the help with payoffs. Look, you and I both know Bloodthirsty Conqueror is ridiculous. You know which decks it goes in. This card's nuts. Not going to spend much time on this card. Archmage of Runes is the real deal for Spellslinger payoffs. Very worth the 5 mana. If you haven't tried this card out, definitely do. Abyssal Harvester is a complete nightmare for your opponents when it's on the battlefield. It represents reanimating anything that happens to fall into a graveyard from a random removal spell, sack outlet, random discard, or mill at any time, and it makes it really hard for anything to happen for your opponents until they kill this Harvester. We'll move on to the Jumpstart, and it had many cool commanders to kind of do build-arounds of, but I'm more interested in talking about the cards that are kind of going to go generally into decks. And we'll start that sort of list off here with General Crete. It continues to add to the much needed critical mass mentioned with Agate Instigator. All the things I said about Crete's lizard cousin apply here, but Crete is also a goblin, and goblins also really appreciate this effect. Sutina, Speaker of Tajeru, is an excellent upgrade to Farhaven Elf, allowing you to pick up utility lands for added effects, and making sure your landfall effects never stop. Scythecat Cub has minor pros and cons compared to Bristly Bill, but in most circumstances, they go in the same decks and are just as effective as one another. Eidolon of Astral Winds is a very strong win condition for the Enchantress decks you wish would just kill you. That may or may not be a deck or two of mine. Hinterland Sanctifier is another great 1-mana Soul Sister that desperately is needed for density. There are so many other cards to talk about, but I'll cut it off here. Let me know what your favorite thing at Commander in 2024 was. That's it. You made it. Thank you for listening. Thank you for your time. I'll try to get some more uploads going. My deck building certainly hasn't stopped. I have so many cool deck ideas to share, If you'd like to be around when I finally get around to sharing them, stay plugged in to the channel. Much love. Take care of yourselves.